The first rip of pain in Gabriel Mercer's chest didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a verdict. It struck him in the middle of a board meeting he'd insisted on scheduling late because daylight never seemed long enough for what he demanded of people. His breath vanished. A claw closed around his sternum as if an iron fist had reached through the clean, glassy night and decided his heart had worked enough. He fumbled for air and found none. The polished edge of the mahogany table bit into his palm as he gripped to steady a world turning sideways. Someone said his name, Mr. Mercer, but the voice was distorted, as if poured through water. He tried to respond, tried to toss out a directive that might save face, if not his life, but no sound came. His executives' faces fractured into a kaleidoscope of panic, ties askew, eyes too wide. The expensive room had never felt smaller. He registered a single caustic thought before everything folded in on itself. Their fear wasn't for him, only for the paycheck pipeline he represented. He fell. Darkness took him like a wave, relentless, cold, without negotiation. He woke to antiseptic, and the metronome of a heart monitor flicking a strict rhythm above him. The ceiling was too bright. Every muscle felt wrung out. The world wobbled into place with the reluctant focus of a camera lens. And then a shadow moved beside the bed. Mr. Mercer. Dr. Priya Menon had been his physician for almost a decade. Their relationship was all calendars and lab numbers and polite emails, no softness, nothing sentimental. Today her eyes held something he'd never seen from her, a fear that had hardened into resolve. "Myocardial infarction," she said, her voice low and steady. "A heart attack, Gabriel." At 32, he swallowed, his throat scratched like sandpaper. "How long until I can get back to the office?" Her gaze sharpened. For a second it looked like she might throw the clipboard. "You almost died. Your heart stopped for nearly a minute. If you hadn't been in a building with a defibrillator and emergency response training," she let the sentence die. The point didn't. He stared at the white ceiling, listening to the beep, beep, beep that tethered him to here. Chronic stress, no sleep, no life beyond the one inside screens. He'd built an empire that didn't allow him to be a person inside it. He couldn't say he hadn't known, he had simply refused to care. "You need to make radical changes," Dr. Menon continued, "or the next one will kill you." Radical changes. The words hung over him like scaffolding he did not know how to climb. He'd crafted himself out of routines that punished any deviation. He didn't know how to be a man who softened anything, not his schedule, not his tone, not his life. "I need you on observation for 2 weeks. "Absolutely not." He was already peeling the sensors away, the cold adhesive pulling at his skin. "Gabriel, I can rest at home," he countered. "Work from home. This is not a negotiation. It's my life." "It's your life," she agreed, "and I'm trying to help you keep it." When he glared, she sighed, walked to the end of the bed and propped her clipboard upon the rail with a small, measured click. "Fine, we compromise." Her voice softened a fraction. "You can go home, but you will have 24-hour care, a private nurse, in your apartment. I don't need a babysitter. You need a human barricade between you and your worst habits," she fired back. "It's this, or I have you admitted for extended medical observation. Choose." He chose because even now he liked the illusion of control. "Fine. But she stays in the guest wing. She doesn't touch anything. She doesn't interrupt me, unless it's to prevent me from dying." "Done," Dr. Menon said crisply, as if she hadn't just strong-armed one of the wealthiest men in Chicago. Then she rested a hand on the side of the bed, her voice dropping so low he had to strain to hear. "And Gabriel? I'd like to keep you as a patient. Please don't make me meet you next time in an ER that can't bring you back." 2 days later, the elevator slid open into his penthouse in the Loop, a fortress of clean lines and cold colors, with floor-to-ceiling windows that slashed the skyline into measured columns of night. He ignored all orders immediately. The desk in his home office glowed with the light of 3 monitors. The city glittered beneath him, pretending to be mineable, as if it were ore, and he had the only pickaxe. When the doorbell chimed, he didn't even check the monitor. Expectation was armor, and his was polished. An older, stern woman in pressed scrubs, surgical shoes that didn't squeak, competent and silent. He opened the door and expectations shattered. A young woman stood there, no more than 24. She wore jeans and a loose cream sweater that bared one shoulder and made her look like she'd stepped out of a different city, one with sunlight and wildflowers. Her hair was a bright, unapologetic auburn pulled into a ponytail that had resisted style enough to leave a halo of escaped curls. Her eyes were a warm amber, like honey poured into a glass and held to the light. She smiled, big and guileless, and held out an offering as incongruous in his apartment as laughter in a boardroom. A plant. A ridiculous, squat succulent with thick, brave leaves in a clay pot, hand-painted with tiny moons. "Hi," she chirped and breezed past him as if he'd already invited her in. "You must be Gabriel. I'm June Hart. I'll be your shadow/nurse for the next 30 days. She took a breath and spun once, slowly, taking in his living room. "Wow, your place is gorgeous. And a tiny bit funereal? Don't worry, I brought reinforcements." She lifted the plant. "He's a Haworthia, very low maintenance. You two will get along." He stared. The throbbing vein at his temple threatened mutiny. "I'm going to have a very long conversation with Dr. Menon." "She told me you'd say that," June said. "She also told me not to let you bulldoze me." So she tapped her own temple. "Game face. Ground rules," he said, voice flat enough to slice. 1. You speak to me only about matters of immediate health. 2. You do not touch or rearrange anything in this apartment. 3. You do not interfere with my work. 4. Professional distance at all times. We are not friends." June listened with her head cocked, a smile looped casually into place like it had never learned how to be threatened. When he finished, she hugged the plant to her chest and said pleasantly, "No." He blinked. "I'm sorry? No." Cheerful as a bell. "Those rules would keep you sick. Isolation spikes cortisol. Communication helps. And frankly, it sounds like you need someone in your orbit who cares whether you sleep, eat real food, and remember you have a body that is not optional equipment." She wasn't wrong. He hated that. "You will not." "I know how to do my job," she interrupted, not unkindly, and the softness took the sting out of the audacity. "You can stomp around and growl if it makes you feel in charge. I've dealt with worse, but I'm going to keep you alive. That's the only rule I won't let you break." The first week was a Cold War staged across expensive surfaces. Gabriel buried himself in spreadsheets and the kind of phone calls that made other people apologize too much. June hummed while she made coffee, rich, dark, unapologetically strong coffee that somehow tasted better than any he had brewed in his life. She labeled his pill bottles with colorful sticky notes in neat, cheerful handwriting. "Take me at 9 a.m., she wrote and drew a smiley face that made him want to redesign his entire kitchen out of spite. "How many hours did you sleep?" she asked one morning, breezing in while the sun was still a rumor on the horizon. 4, he said, and the defensive bark in his voice made him sound 16. "Gabriel," she said, already using his first name like she'd been issued a license for it. "Your heart needs rest. My company needs me not to collapse while I'm sidelined." "Your company will survive," she said gently, like she had no idea what a sentence like that sounded like to a man like him. Then her voice softened even more. "I'm not sure you will if you keep trying to outrun grief with work." No one talked to him like that. No one dared. The breaking point arrived on a night that had folded itself into morning. He was at his desk, the city a grid of patient lights stretching away to Lake Michigan, when June appeared in the doorway wearing flannel pajamas printed with tiny cartoon sheep. She looked so ridiculous and so sincere, he almost laughed. "You promised Dr. Menon," she said. "I promised nothing." "Gabriel." She crossed the room without an invitation and sat in the chair opposite him, drawing her knees up under her like a child. "Why do you do this to yourself?" "Do what?" "Work like the world will end if your hands are still for 2 minutes. Live in this glass castle like you don't know how to unpack a life." She glanced around, her eyes snagged on the single green thing now on his kitchen island. "Well, you have one plant. Progress. But no photos. No couch blanket that looks like anyone has ever fallen asleep under it. No, you." "None of your business," he said, too sharp, the sound of defense turned into a blade. "It is," she said, not backing down. "Because loneliness will kill you as surely as stress. And you," she looked at him, and he had the strangest urge to look away because her eyes saw him. "You are the loneliest person I've ever met." Something gave in his chest that wasn't physical. He stared at his keyboard. "You don't know me. Then let me," she whispered. Outside, Chicago sighed around them. Inside, in the soft light of a home that wasn't one, he considered it. Later, a noise from the kitchen pulled him from brittle sleep that refused to let him rest. He padded out barefoot. June stood at the island, hair loosened into a messy halo, making hot chocolate in a saucepan like the kind people in movies drank when they'd chosen tenderness over bitterness. "Couldn't sleep," she said with a sheepish smile. "I never sleep well." The admission slipped out, unpolished and honest. "Since the heart attack?" she asked. "Since always." He sat. His voice surprised him by continuing, "Since I was 12 and woke up to my parents' voices ripping the house apart every night. Since the day I came home from school and my mother's closet was half empty and my father was in his study with a whiskey and he looked at me and said she'd chosen freedom over us and then went back to whatever deal he was making. The dam broke. He hadn't realized how much of his life had sat behind it, heavy and itching." He told June about the slammed doors, the broken plates, the acid words that had soaked the wallpaper. He told her about Victor, his father, whose grief had calcified into contempt, and then morphed into a manual for living. Emotions are liabilities, love is a con. Vulnerability is a chink an enemy will aim for. He told her how well he'd learned those rules. "So that's why you don't believe in love," June said softly. It wasn't a question. "Love doesn't exist," he said, out of habit. The words were automatic and tasted like ash. "There's convenience, attraction, partnership, if you're lucky. But the story people sell, that's for fools who need to feel special." June set the mugs on the island and leaned toward him, her eyes firelit by the under-cabinet lighting. "What your parents had wasn't love," she said, gentle and fierce. "It was toxicity and fear. Love is a choice. It's showing up when it isn't glamorous. It's vulnerability you choose and choose and choose again. It's seeing someone's mess and deciding they're still worth bringing soup when they're sick." "You're too young to be so naive," he muttered, but it came out without bite. "And you're too young to be so cynical," she shot back, the corner of her mouth tilting. "Your parents broke parts of you, Gabriel, but broken doesn't mean irreparable." The words made his chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with scar tissue. For a moment, something like hope slipped between his ribs. He didn't know what to do with it. In the days that followed, his apartment shifted by degrees. June cooked, and he discovered that food touched by care tasted different than the meals brought by his assistant and deposited in the kitchen like a task completed. He took breaks because she told him to, because she put his pills right in his orbit, because she asked, "Walk with me to the balcony for 10 minutes, and then stood with him there in silence that wasn't empty. The room's filled with small, brave things. A book left open on a coffee table. A blanket actually used. Laughter, quiet, tentative at first, then warmer, threaded its way through the rooms the way morning light did. He caught June talking to the Haworthia in the kitchen as if it were an old friend. "You're doing great," she whispered. "Keep growing." He rolled his eyes and felt inexplicably better. One afternoon, she wrapped the cuff around his arm, and her fingers found his pulse at his wrist. She frowned. "Your heart rate is elevated." "I'm fine," he said too quickly. "Gabriel, this is important. If you're feeling—" "I'm not sick," he said. He captured her hand, surprised by the way his own fingers trembled as they closed over hers. He held her gaze. The air welded itself between them. "It's faster because you're too close." Her eyes widened. The clinical part of the room cracked, and something raw stepped through. She pulled her hand back like her skin had remembered fire. I need to check your medications," she stammered and fled. He stayed. His heart hammered for a full 3 minutes after she disappeared, not from fear of dying, from the way she made living feel like a thing you could want. He told himself all the lies he always had. Professional arrangement, gratitude, recovery side effect. They dissolved every one of them. Wanting her crowded his chest until there wasn't room for anything else. The next few days unraveled into a strange dance of closeness and avoidance. June grew careful, efficient, avoiding his gaze like it had become a door she wasn't brave enough to open. He tried to respect the line, but he failed whenever she laughed or brushed past him in the kitchen, and the scent of her, citrus and some kind of flower he didn't know the name of, hit him like a memory he hadn't made yet. One night, they reached for the refrigerator at the same time. Her foot slipped on the slick tile. His hands moved without his permission, closing around her waist, steadying her. They froze, bodies not quite touching, the space between them alive as a flame. He could count the freckles on her nose. "Sorry," he murmured, and didn't let go. "It's okay," she whispered, and didn't move away. The air held them up for a long breath. Then June blinked, stepped back, and the spell snapped. The loss of her body against his felt like stepping into a cold room. "Can we talk about this?" she asked quietly, gesturing between them. "About what?" "What's happening?" His walls rose. It had taken his father years to mortar them, but they still fit him like he'd been poured inside them while wet. "Nothing is happening," he said. "You're my nurse." "Professional boundaries," she said, her jaw tightening. "Right. The ones you crossed when you told me your heart races when I'm near." "That was a mistake," he lied, hating the way the words looked on her face. "I shouldn't have said it." "But you did," she said, "and you can't take it back." "What do you want from me, Gabriel?" Everything. He wanted her coffee and her messy ponytail and her humming and her hand finding his in hallways for the rest of his life. He wanted to know what her childhood room looked like, whether she'd ever broken a bone, if she cried at commercials. He wanted the plant family to outgrow his kitchen island. "I want you to keep doing your job," he managed. Nothing more. The hurt in her eyes cut him with a blade he deserved. "Right," she said evenly. "Professionalism. Got it." She walked to the guest wing and closed the door quietly, and that soft click echoed worse than any slam. He stared at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, wide awake. Finally, he gave up and padded into the living room. A single lamp glowed. June sat curled on the sofa, lit by that small gold circle, staring at her phone. He was halfway across the room before he saw the tear slide down her cheek. "June," he said, softer than he had ever said a name. She startled and swiped at her face. "I didn't hear you." "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar." He sat on the edge of the coffee table, close enough to see the photo on the screen when she turned it toward him. A younger June smiled at him from the image, a hand splayed over a rounded belly, joy so bright it made his throat burn. "Who was she?" he asked, and his voice remembered how to be careful. "Who I used to be," June whispered, "before everything broke." He waited. He didn't talk over the silence. He let it make room for her. "I was married," she said. Words fragile as sweets you could ruin just by breathing too hard. 19. He was Trent Morrow, college sweetheart. Charming. He said all the right things. I told myself fairy tales and believed them because I wanted them so badly. When I got pregnant 6 months later, she smiled at a ghost in the room with them. I thought life had decided to be kind. We were going to be a family. She told him about how Trent had changed after the wedding, about perfume that wasn't hers on shirts he said he wore only to work, about late nights and secret phone calls that sent her into bathrooms to swallow tears as if they weren't real if nobody saw them. She told him about the day she learned the baby was a girl, about the joy fizzing so high in her chest on the drive home that she sang out loud to the radio and didn't care who saw. "I found him in our bed," she said, her voice turning hollow, "with her." The pain ripped through the room, clean and devastating. He told me I'd become obsessed with the pregnancy, that I didn't make him feel like a man anymore. She laughed. A sharp sound that had nothing to do with humor. I got in my car and I drove. I cried so hard the road was a smear. The cramps started. They were impossible. She stared somewhere he couldn't follow. She didn't need to say the rest. "I lost my daughter that day," June breathed into the thin quiet. "I was 19. Her name was going to be Evie. I lost my marriage, the idea of the girl I was, and her, all in a single afternoon. He had nothing adequate to say to that kind of grief. "June," he managed, "I am so sorry." "I didn't know." "No one does," she said. "I don't talk about it much. But you deserve to know why I am the way I am. Why I still believe in love after all that." "How?" The word broke out of him. "How do you care for people? How do you smile? How are you not angry at the whole world?" "Because choosing bitterness gives him everything," she said simply. "It would let one awful day define everyone after it. Evie was real. The love I had for her was real. And even though I lost her, I won't pretend it wasn't worth everything. You think love is an illusion because your parents hurt you. I think love is a miracle because my daughter taught me it was possible, and because the absence of it nearly destroyed me." "You're extraordinary," he said before he could stop it. "I'm broken," she corrected reflexively. "But broken doesn't mean irreparable. You said that to me once." He didn't think. He reached for her and pulled her into him. She resisted for 2 heartbeats, and then let go, sobbing into his chest, years of grief shaking through his ribs. He held her, rubbed his hand over her back in circles that matched the ancient rhythm of comfort all people know how to offer, even when they've forgotten everything else. When she pulled back, her eyes were red, but her mouth formed a real smile, small and brave. They were close enough to count breaths. His gaze dropped to her lips. Hers did the same. "Gabriel," she said. It wasn't a warning. It was a permission he received like grace. He kissed her, carefully, like a question. The answer tasted like chocolate and salt and something new that didn't have a name yet. When he pulled back, the truth rushed out, terrifying and clean. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice raw. "Feelings. I was trained to dodge them." "Then we learned together," she whispered. "One day at a time." Everything changed after that. Not grandly, there were no orchestra swells, just small bravery threaded into ordinary motions. He found excuses to touch her, an unnecessary brush of fingers when she handed him medication, a hand at the small of her back when he passed behind her, a hug that lingered just longer than it needed to. Her smile turned secret in a way that made the back of his neck warm. They still slept in separate rooms because they said the word professional and pretended it meant something anymore. But their dinners stretched into hours, and their conversations curled around everything, soft and unguarded, until both of them sat quietly inside the same promise of something neither dared name. A week later, Dr. Menon showed up in sneakers and a cardigan that told him she'd left the hospital the second she could. She took his blood pressure, scanned the meticulous health logs June kept, and then finally let her expression do something light. "Whatever you two are doing, keep doing it. You've got a working heart." "It's June," Gabriel said simply, his eyes finding June's across the room like they had been tethered. "She's very good at her job." Dr. Menon's mouth tilted. Clearly. After she left, the apartment exhaled. June tidied the kitchen, stacking plates in cabinets he'd barely noticed he owned when he'd been living here alone. He leaned against the counter and watched her. "I am officially not dying," he said. "You were never dying." Her voice was soft, just paused. "And now?" He didn't know why the question shook. "And now you have to keep taking care of yourself," she said, turning to face him, eyes suddenly complicated. Which means I don't need a nurse," he finished. Dread hit him like a step missed at the top of a staircase. "Technically," she said, the word breaking in the middle. She stared at the floor. The silence swelled. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked at last, and her courage was honey-thick, sweet and determined. "No." The word ripped out of him, unguarded and real. He stepped closer. "But I can't ask you to stay as my nurse when I don't need one." "It's unfair," she supplied. "Wrong," he finished. "Then," she lifted her chin, "ask me to stay as something else." He stared at her, mind racing like a train without rails. "As what?" "As the person you like having around," she said, her voice gaining strength with every word she chose. "As the person who makes you laugh. As the person who is completely terrifyingly falling in love with you and doesn't want to go anywhere. His body did that thing again, like the air had left it. He wanted to run because that was what he did when anything felt like wanting he couldn't control. Then he saw her, the girl who had lost everything important and still refused to close her hands to the world. Shame seared him clean. "I don't know if I can be what you need," he said, honesty carving him open. "I don't know how to love." "Your father was wrong," she said, heat in her voice for the first time when she spoke of Victor. "About everything. Love isn't a weakness. It's the bravest thing you can ever choose. You don't have to be perfect at it. You just have to try." He didn't have words. He had a mouth, and he put it on hers. This time the kiss wasn't careful. It was hungry with a kind of hope that terrified him. When he finally broke away, he whispered against her lips, "Stay. Not as my nurse, not as a guest. Stay with me." She didn't hesitate. Yes. He fell asleep for the first time with a body pressed to his he wanted there. June's head tucked beneath his chin, her breath a rhythm against the place his heart had tried to quit. For a wild moment before sleep took him, he had the thought, maybe love exists. Maybe it looks like this. Reality intruded the next morning like it always did, with a phone call. Alina Reyes, his assistant, sounded breathless. "Mr. Mercer, your father is on his way up." He insisted. Cold washed him clean of sleep. Victor, of course. The man had a sixth sense for ruining stability as soon as it looked like it might attempt to live past noon. "Tell him I'm busy," Gabriel said. "I tried." "He's already in the elevator." He hung up. A knot tightened in his stomach. June touched his hand. "What is it?" "My father. He's coming here." "It will be okay," she said, squeezing. When the doorbell rang 20 minutes later, and he opened it to see Victor Mercer in his impeccable suit with his razor blade expression, June's stomach dropped so fast she had to lock her knees to keep from swaying. He was an older, harsher copy of his son, same cut cheekbones, same mouth, but his eyes were winter. "Father," Gabriel said, and the word was so neutral it could have been a temperature reading. Victor walked in without waiting for the invitation. Eyes taking the room apart. He paused at the new things, the plant on the island, the flowers on the table, the blanket slung over the couch back like someone allowed themselves to be tired here. He frowned. "You've redecorated," he said, making it sound like a euphemism for failure. "June brought a few things," Gabriel said, shoulders tightening. "June?" Victor's gaze finally landed on her, and the appraisal sharpened into disdain. "And who is June?" "My nurse," Gabriel said, and the lie tasted like bitterness. "Ah," Victor said, lowering himself into Gabriel's favorite chair like it belonged to him. "The heart attack. That's why I'm here, to make sure you haven't decided to die and undo everything I built." The visit was a disaster immediately. Victor interrogated his son about deals delayed, about meetings delegated, about any terrain he could twist into a demonstration of weakness. Gabriel listened for 2 minutes and then snapped, "I had a heart attack. I almost died." "And whose fault is that?" Victor said coolly. "I taught you discipline. You taught me to be a machine," Gabriel bit out, "with a calendar for a life and panic for a pulse. Look where it got me." Victor's eyes flicked to June again, and contempt narrowed them. "It's her, isn't it? The nurse, putting soft ideas in your head." "She's keeping me alive," Gabriel said, his voice calm and dangerous. "In ways you never did." "Care?" Victor barked. The sound wasn't a laugh. It was a weapon. "I made you a billionaire." Care is a luxury for weak men. June stepped forward because she was brave and because she didn't know how not to be. "With respect, Mr. Mercer," she said, and didn't flinch when those cold eyes turned on her. "You're wrong. Your son almost died because he learned from you that feelings are dangerous and connection is irrelevant. You taught him to treat his heart like equipment. That's not strength. That's fear dressed up in a suit." Victor rose. Indignation made him taller. "And who do you think you are?" "Someone who loves your son," June said simply. "Not the CEO, not the name on the building. Just the man whose coffee I make and whose laugh I would protect with my whole life. You should try it." Gabriel didn't know whether to be terrified or grateful. He wanted to wrap his arms around her, and also hide her from the blowback of a storm he had navigated since he could tie shoes. "Father," he said through his teeth, "a word." They went into the office. Doors muffled sound but couldn't erase it. Voices rose and something shattered, likely the framed glass he'd been pretending meant something. When Gabriel came out again, his face was carved into control. "He's gone." June's heart thudded. "What happened?" He didn't answer. He just went to her and hugged her like drowning looks for a hand. "I chose you," he whispered against her hair. "I chose us." Victor Mercer didn't lose often. He didn't like it. 2 days later, June stood in a grocery store aisle debating the merits of spinach that had given up and spinach that still believed in itself, when Victor appeared next to her like a bad omen in an instructed suit. "Ms. Hart," he said, smooth now, the ice disguised as silk. "A word." He bought her a coffee at the cafe across the street and set it in front of her with the smile of a man signing a deal he'd already closed. "You seem like a good girl, genuine." "Thank you," she said, wary, "which is why I'm warning you." He leaned in. "You are going to ruin my son." "I love Gabriel," she said, and the steadiness in her made her prouder than she felt in a while. "I know," he said, "and that's the problem." He was bred for a specific life, a specific kind of woman who knows how to behave in the rooms he moves through. You, with all your kindness, will become weight, dead weight. You will force him to choose, legacy or love, and he will resent you for making him choose. He put a card down like a magician revealing a final trick. "When you realize I'm right, call me. I'll help you leave. I'll even make it comfortable." June slid the card back. "Go to hell," she said quietly. She walked out. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully like it had no idea what a sentence it had punctuated. Her hands shook for an hour. The words burrowed like needles into places that had scarred over but never healed smooth. "You don't belong. You'll ruin him." Trent had told her versions of those words too. She had been 19 and raw, and she had believed him because she wanted to avoid causing pain to anyone ever again. She had learned terrible lessons. They were the kind that clung. She didn't tell Gabriel. She should have. The truth got tangled in fear and stayed behind her teeth. A distance grew between them, small at first, then noticeable if you were paying precise attention, which Gabriel was learning to do when it came to tracking June. She still smiled. She still reached for his hand when they crossed rooms. At night, she still tucked herself against him and slept. But some brightness dimmed, like a light bulb that would sometimes flicker when you walked past. He noticed she looked away quicker. He noticed the way she folded into herself at every mention of his world. Names of people, places with too much glass and cold forks. "Is everything okay?" he asked over dinner one night. June's fork paused above a roasted carrot. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. "Of course, just tired." It wasn't fatigue. It was fear. She started noticing things that hadn't hurt before. The way Gabriel's few friends watched her with a politeness that froze rather than welcomed. The way Alina's efficiency felt like judgment. A tabloid photo from months ago with Gabriel in a tuxedo, his arm around a woman who looked like the part of his life you put on magazine covers. A woman who fit so seamlessly he could have been carved to stand next to her. The invitation to the philanthropic gala should have been hope. "Come with me," Gabriel said, his voice almost boyish, the tiniest thread of excitement weaving through it. "I don't know." June's fingers twisted in the hem of her sweater. "I don't have anything to wear to that." "I'll buy you whatever you want," he said easily, because problems solved with money were his favorite kind. He didn't mean it like it came out. She flinched. "I don't want to be your charity project." The words hit him like a thrown object. He recoiled, shock turning to hurt. "June, what's going on?" "Nothing," she insisted. "Just go alone. It'll be easier." Easier for who? For both of us, she thought. But her voice betrayed her, and he went alone. She spent the evening scrolling through photos of the event, flicking through strangers' lives that looked polished enough to blind you. The comments, the captioned names, the world that moved like it had never had to apologize for existing. Roberts, no. Victor's, words nod. "You don't belong." When Gabriel came home, He found her curled on the sofa, crying in a way that made him feel helpless in a way money could never fix. "I can't do this," June said, the words tumbling out. Me trying to pretend I'm good enough. I'm not." "Who told you that?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet and suddenly very steady. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He slammed his fist into the wall like years of self-control had been a dam and someone had finally pressed the right place. The drywall cracked, the sound ugly in the quiet. "That son," he closed his eyes. "He's wrong." He knelt in front of her. "We make sense." "I will hold you back," June cried. "You'll have to choose between me and rooms like the one you were in tonight. And you'll hate me for it." "I could never. I've been here before." She stood, shaking. Being the problem, being too much and not enough, somehow both. "Trent told me, then his mother told me. Your father just completed the chorus. There's a possibility they're right, Gabriel." June ... "I need time." She backed toward the guest room, the one they hadn't used in weeks. "I need to think." He pressed his forehead to the cool wood after the lock snicked into place. "Don't let him win," he said, his voice breaking ugly. "Don't let his fear and my past take what we made." In the room, June pulled a piece of paper out of the drawer and started to write. The decision felt like picking up a knife and carving something necessary and terrible. "Dear Gabriel." He woke with dread in his stomach. The guest room door stood open. He saw the bed made smooth. He saw the empty space where her suitcase had been. Panic detonated in his body. "June!" His voice bounced off walls that felt cavernous again. Kitchen, living room, her bathroom. He found only the green plants she'd brought into his monochrome world. Small living things he didn't know how to keep alive on his own. Then he saw the white envelope. His name on it in that neat, hopeful script. "Dear Gabriel, if you're reading this, I'm already gone." By the time he finished, he'd read it 3 times. Tears he hadn't given himself permission to shed burned. Then the CEO part of him, the cold operator, stood up inside his bones with a different mission. He called Alina. "Cancel everything today," he said. "Everything. The board meeting. Everything. And I need June Hart's personnel file." He felt sick when it hit him that he didn't know the name of her hometown. In every conversation, he had focused on the parts of her he wanted to love, and had somehow avoided asking which roads had made them. The file gave it to him. Willow Creek, Colorado. The next flight was too far away. He took his keys and left. The drive would give him time to think and no way to back out. He passed through long ribbons of interstate and then roads that thinned into 2-lane stretches where the sky was closer and the world smelled like rain on dust. An hour in, he called his father. "I have something to say and you are going to listen," he said as soon as Victor answered. "You were wrong. About love being weakness, about emotions being luxuries, and most of all, about June not being good enough." Silence. The kind that meant he'd surprised him. "She is the best person I've ever met," Gabriel said, the words hard and clean. "She saved me. Not just my heart, my life. If you can't see it, if you can't accept that I am choosing her over everything you taught me, then you don't get to be my father anymore." "Gabriel, I will always love you," he said, his voice cracking once. "You are my father, but I will not let your cynicism destroy the only real thing I have ever found." He hung up. The road unraveled. He felt free for the first time since he was 12. He hit Willow Creek just as evening dragged purple across the edges of the sky. Her mother's house was small and neat and wore its age like comfort rather than decay. The porch light glowed. Through the front window he saw June's silhouette and another woman's, older, tired eyes that were softer than the world had been. He knocked. Her mother answered and took him in like a human-sized problem she hadn't asked for. "Can I help you?" "I'm Gabriel Mercer," he said, hearing the uselessness of the name in a place like this. "I'm looking for June." Recognition flickered, and something like disappointment. "You're the rich one. I'm the man who loves your daughter," he corrected. "I drove a long way to say that." She studied him, then stepped back and called, "Juniper, honey? There's someone here for you." June came to the door, Her face was pale from crying. When she saw him, she froze on the threshold, a girl caught between leaving and being loved. "We need to talk," he said, and even exhausted, even frayed to threads, his voice had purpose. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, because her mind knew reasons, her heart had different ones. "I read your letter," he said from the edge of her mother's porch light. "Then you understand why." "I understand that you're wrong." The sky rumbled with thunder like they were standing inside a script. A fat drop of rain hit the step, then another. In seconds, they were both wet, hair plastered to faces, tears indistinguishable from summer rain. "My father convinced you you're not enough for my world," he said, raising his voice over the downpour. "But he's not enough. He wasn't enough as a father when my mother left. He wasn't there when my heart stopped. He has spent decades teaching me wrong things, and I was stupid enough to pay attention. You told me you would be in the way, that our worlds don't fit. But you are my world, Juniper Heart. For the first time in my life, I've been living." "Gabriel." "No, my turn." He closed the distance and took her cold hands in his wet ones. "You're scared because Trent taught you to feel worthless, and my father poured poison into the well he expected me to drink from forever. But I've been with the right women, the ones who had the names and the rooms and the gowns. Not one of them ever made me want to be better. Not one saw me the way you do." They were so close he could feel the tremble in her. "I spent 32 years believing love was a weakness," he said, a tear mixing with the rain. "And then you walked into my apartment with a ridiculous plant and an impossible smile, and you made every wall I had make no sense." "What if Victor's right?" she whispered. "What if I hold you back? What if you're the best thing that will ever happen to me, and I let fear ruin it?" he countered, suddenly urgent. "What if we spend decades asking, what if? I don't want to resent, I want to choose." He swallowed. "I love you. I am in love with you. Maybe our worlds are different. Then we build a new one." He did the one thing she didn't expect. He dropped to one knee in the mud under the storm and looked up at her with his heart in his hands, like an offering he'd never thought he'd make. "I don't have a ring or a prepared speech," he said, voice raw. "But marry me. Not for a contract, not for anyone's opinion. Marry me because your laugh has become my favorite sound. Marry me because every time I think about any future that matters, you're standing in it." The rain beat down, loud as applause. The city boy and the girl who had learned how to outlive a tornado of loss stood on a porch and chose something in its middle. "Yes," she breathed. And then louder, a laugh breaking open. The kind you only make when you have been given back something you thought was gone. "Yes, 1,000 times." Her mother stood in the doorway crying and laughing and telling them to get inside before they both caught pneumonia. And the world, for a minute, was the kind of story people write songs about. 3 days later, they drove back to Chicago in a quiet that wasn't empty. At the last minute, Gabriel took an exit that wasn't theirs. June looked over. "Where are we going?" "To settle things," he said, jaw set with purpose that didn't rely on anger for once. He parked in front of the glass tower with his name on it. He turned, put his hand over hers. She squeezed back. "Always," she said. Victor looked like a man who had found himself in a different house than the one he'd built when they walked into his office, especially because June stood at Gabriel's side by choice, chin up, eyes steady. "Miss Hart," Victor said, and June smiled. "It's June," she corrected gently. "Soon to be June Mercer." Victor blinked. He was good at hiding shock. He wasn't perfect. "We're engaged," Gabriel said, and left no room in the sentence for anybody else's hands. "You will respect her," he finished. "You will respect us, or you will lose me." Tension held the room up like beams. Victor looked from his son to the woman, who had clearly been a catalyst powerful enough to undo decades. The sigh he let out sounded tired, and for the first time since Gabriel could remember, his father looked like a person. "I was wrong," he said. The words felt expensive. He sat back down and rubbed a hand over his jaw, a human gesture, unpracticed. "When your mother left, something snapped in me. I poured all that bitterness into you because it was easier than sifting it out of myself. I taught you not to feel because I thought feeling made people leave. I haven't been alone since she left. I've dated, I've had arrangements, but I never let anyone get close because it felt safer. I called it smart. He laughed once, a broken sound. It wasn't. It was cowardice. He looked at June. I told you you weren't good enough for him. The truth is, he wasn't good enough for you. You walked into his life and rebuilt pieces I had broken, and then shoved responsibility for onto him. And I tried to destroy it because I was jealous there was something in this world I hadn't designed that mattered more than anything that had my name on it. His eyes filled. Gabriel had never seen them do that. I'm sorry for almost ruining something so good. June crossed the room and hugged him. He stood stiff as a statue and then melted a fraction, hesitantly returning the embrace with the awkward hands of a man learning a new language. It's not too late to start over, she said softly, for any of us. In the months that followed, life arranged itself around choices that were smaller and more important than any deal he'd ever done. June took a job in the cardiac wing of a hospital where she came home smelling faintly of antiseptic and cinnamon gum, and told him stories, carefully anonymized, about small miracles that had nothing to do with operating budgets. Gabriel got better at leaving the office at 6 and learned that the sun felt different when you let it touch your skin before the day had given itself to night. They planned a wedding that would not have looked like the ones his world usually threw. Small, intimate, in Willow Creek in early autumn when the leaves had decided to show off. Something unexpected happened while they were picking out shepherd's hooks for mason jar lights and arguing over pie flavors. Victor and June's mother, Elaine, started corresponding. It began with emails about florists and progressed to phone calls about weather and vinyl records, and then about stories of people they had loved poorly and the ones they wanted to love better. One night, June looked up from her phone and said to Gabriel, half amused and half horrified, "I think your father is flirting with my mother." Gabriel pulled her into his lap and grinned. "Good," he murmured against her temple. "Everyone deserves a second shot." The day itself arrived blue and full. They held the ceremony in Elaine's backyard, the same porch where he had gone to his knees serving as the altar, as if the wood had remembered it. June stood in a simple dress that made her look like the exact right kind of extraordinary. Elaine fussed with her hair, cried, declared she was done crying, and then cried again. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "No," June said, and meant it. "I've never felt surer of anything." Across the house, Victor adjusted his tie and cleared his throat too much. "Are you sure, son?" he asked, and his voice wasn't its old steel. It was a softer metal that knew how to bend without breaking. "I've never been more sure of anything," Gabriel said, and meant it in the bones he used to think were only for holding him up at meetings. He waited at the end of the makeshift aisle with the kind of heart beating that used to scare him and now felt like joy. When June walked to him on her mother's arm under the blaze of leaves, he felt tears sting his eyes, and this time he didn't bury them under anything. Elaine kissed her daughter's cheek and then looked up at him. "You take care of my treasure." "With my life," he promised, and everyone believed him because his voice had learned how to say what it meant. Their vows were the kind that rearrange people who hear them. "You saved me," he said, and June smiled, shaking her head gently. "No," she said, taking his hands. "We saved each other." "You may kiss the bride," the officiant said, and they did, and it was not clean or polished. It was real and messy in the best ways, and someone's great aunt who had been pretending not to cry sobbed. After, between cake and pie, they couldn't decide, June slipped away and stood by a window for a minute, looking at a worn photo she kept in her wallet, her young self, her hand on a belly full of a girl who had taught her love before this life had a chance to try again. "Are you okay?" Gabriel asked, finding her as if he had a compass that pointed to her and no other north. "I am," she said, a soft, sweet ache in her voice. "I wish she could see this. That her mom is happy. She knows," he whispered, wrapping his arms around her and resting his chin on her shoulder. Then his hands shifted, dropping to rest against her stomach, protective and reverent. "And she knows she's going to be a big sister." She turned, eyes wide, breath gone. "What? Gabriel, I'm not." "You are," He smiled, the brightest she'd ever seen. "I found the test in the trash this morning. I wasn't going to say anything until you were ready, but I couldn't keep it in my chest without exploding." For a second, the room tilted. Then she laughed, pure and shocked and wild with joy. We're having a baby." "We're having a baby," he confirmed, his voice so full of love it sounded like a new language. He kissed her, promises they didn't need to say out loud, written into the way his hands trembled, and then steadied on her back. Around them, family that had been broken and remade cheered loud enough to wake the trees. Later, after music and after promises and after cake, Gabriel stood in the backyard where he'd asked, and she'd said yes. And he understood in a way that didn't require proof. Love wasn't a fairy tale with an audience. It was a choice you made when it rained. It was the courage to let someone see what you looked like with your walls down. It was messy and chaotic and imperfect. It was the only thing in his life that had ever mattered more than an outcome. Once, he had looked at the world and said, "I don't believe in love," and it had sounded like a man proud of something he'd built. Now, with June's hand linked to his and new life beginning under the hand he'd placed on her belly, he felt the truth settle, warm as sunlight on his skin. He believed, and he would keep choosing that belief every day for the rest of their lives.